Macy's has all of your Grill Master essentials for Father's Day. Stop by to get our hand-trimmed chicken breast and certified Angus beef patties that are ready to grill, so Dad can have his favorite dinner. Make sure to browse our bakery to find the perfect no-work Father's Day treat with our decadent peanut butter bars or famous donuts. Right now, you can get boneless beef ribeye steaks for $12.99 per pound at Macy's. Shop these Father's Day essentials in-store or online at Macys.com through June 18th. Macy's, happy shopping!
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation.
Welcome to A Cultural History of Canada. My name is Patrick, and with me, as always, is my Australian expat co-host, Mackenzie. How are you?
I'm pretty damn good, Patrick. Before this episode started, we were making beaver jokes.
Starting off with the impenetrable references. 10 out of 10 pro podcaster move.
I mean, I feel like for a Canadian podcast, a beaver joke isn't that, like, it's not that goddamn out there, you know?
No. It only works because you explained it.
The jokes are pretty damned in.
Anyway,
we don't have to lodge them up there, you know?
No, that's true. Thank you. Okay, how many can you keep going on this one?
I don't know. We'll see how long the podcast go.
Okay. So this is the show where we talk about various moments in Canadian history and use cultural items to talk about.
Chew each other's ears off.
Yeah, we just chit chat, shoot the shit, and sometimes say something smart.
Yeah.
Most of the time, not.
We're stupid, or as one person called us, irreverent.
Actually included that in the show's description as a result. I'm like, yeah, that's a good tagline. So anyway, today we're continuing, in a sense, the discussion that we sort of started off with William Lyon Mackenzie King and alluded to when we talked about the Mad Trapper, the Great Depression.
Wait, this is an episode about me?
Yes. It's just talking about doom scrolling.
Yes. That I will say. I've been having fun watching the reactions after the debate.
My God. Yeah. Oh God.
I did that while talking to my illegal immigrant alien who's getting a transgender operation while in jail. Yeah, no, today we don't have an episode today. We have concepts of an episode.
To me, it's just these things sound like career-ending statements, like career-ending moves, right?
No, the race is still tight.
Exactly. And it's just so funny every time that, it becomes a meme so quickly and it seems so insane. And then we move on to, we moved on from the fact that someone tried to assassinate him 2 days after.
Okay, that
is insane.
But that has a very different problem. That's less about Trump and that's more just about American gun culture.
Well, yes, that and also just internet culture, but also just how much stuff that is insane is happening at the same time.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry, what were you going to say about trans aliens or whatever?
Oh, they're just so great.
They're cool. I for one welcome my trans alien overlords.
Wait, my transgender alien. They could put me in prison with the rest of them. As long as they don't eat my dogs and my cats.
Look, statistically speaking, police have a higher chance of killing your dogs than
the
immigrants do, but whatever.
The transgender aliens. I'm sorry, I needed that laugh.
Mackenzie King is our own person's transgender alien.
Currently being haunted by the ghost of John A. McDonald.
This episode is off to a just fantastic start.
It's off to a
gumming up,
start.
gun swinging.
But you know what? Just like the Great Depression, this episode is gonna bust.
It just creeps up on you when you least expect it.
We're gonna be busting for the next hour.
So basically, what we're going to talk about today is more like the general outline of the Depression, the Great Depression that hit in the late 20s, in relation to a play that was written by Jack Winter called 10 Lost Years, which is a really interesting play, mostly for its
About the 10 lost years.
exactly about the 10 lost years, but it really, I think, addresses it in a structural way that's quite engaging. And next episode, I want to cover more specific aspects of the Great Depression rather than its more general felt sentiment, right? Like labor issues, for example, that were happening right around this time, and the emergence of certain political parties that are still with us to this day, right? So there are some intricacies. And yeah, Bennett's going to get his whole episode. It's just
as a prime minister, he earns one.
I don't know if he earns one, but he certainly will get one. Yeah.
It's just like being prime minister. He didn't.
So, Mac, I guess where do we begin with the Great Depression? Like, what's your conception of it? Like, why did it start? What do you know of how it just kicked off? Right? How did we just slump the economy harder than we had ever slumped before?
Well, this was post World War I, and so God, where do you even start to explain why the Great Depression happened? The biggest one of the biggest reasons was just overindulgence and over excess. And part of that problem was the fact that like we hadn't created planned obsolescence yet in things. So people were like, there was a great big period of buying, sure, but then they only had to buy things once, which theoretically is great. But unfortunately, in a capitalist economy, you have to keep spending.
Exactly.
So then these people would get these. Oh God, I'm explaining this. It's just such a large fucking thing. Like, how do you start explaining the cause of the Great Depression? Like, you have to talk about the fact that large chunks of Europe defaulted on their reparation payments and their loans to pay back what was happening. You have to talk about the hyperinflation. You have to like
part of like
jumping out of windows.
Exactly. Part of like I guess that's all connected, right? Is because people were defaulting on loans, right? They were not able to repay any kind of payments. Yeah. And so money was worth less and less, right? As a general idea, as people were unable to do anything with it.
And we have to be clear, the types of loans that they were defaulting on were not things like mortgages. Like this was not a problem that was, as with most depressions and recessions, this wasn't caused by like the lower working class people.
No.
This was caused by the rich people playing with everybody's fucking money.
Oh yeah, just this one. That'll never happen again. We learned our lesson from that one.
2008. What? To be fair, Canada actually did pretty well relative to the rest of the world in the 2008 recession.
Yeah, because we have actual like measures in place. But that's kind of part of it as well, right? Why in the 1920s it failed so hard, right?
Yeah,
like in the 1930s, yeah.
You really just have to look at like economic theory and the basis of the boom and bust cycle.
Yeah.
Because that is what the U.S. is based on. Their entire capitalist idea is based on this idea that they will have large booms when the economy goes great. But what goes up must come down, so every large boom will have a proportionally large bust. So even from the theory, this was inevitable. Like if you're going to have like this big roaring 20s economy, it will eventually come crashing down in the most spectacular fashion possible. And so that's shockingly what happened. Like nobody is ever too big to fail. The banks, the companies, they're never too big to fail. And so the booming period ended, and then the economy busted to the absolute bottom. And then eventually this isn't like it keeps happening.
What's kind of interesting is like this boom and bust cycle did happen before, right? Like it happened multiple times in the 19th century, for example, as you were saying, this type of economy had been firmly established by then, right? So but the major difference
so great is that most of the world still hadn't recovered from World War I.
Exactly. And most of the world was now connected in a way that was not the case in the 19th century. Right, exactly, right. We were more connected.
Crazier.
And in the
And we see this
1920s also.
continue too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Even for all the protection put in, like the 50s was a period of the 40s and 50s were a period of boom and bust, but then we had like there was some downturn in the 60s, and that's why we got things like the hippie movement or whatever. It picked back up again, and then there was the oil crisis that brought it back down after, you know, Reaganomics. Woo! Picked back up again under the Clinton administration. Crashed and burned into the Great Recession under the Bush administration. Obama kind of helped pick things up. The Donald, not so much, and then coronavirus hit.
For sure. And also like what makes busts now even harder in some ways as those early ones is the fact that it more directly impacts the average person, right?
Yeah,
Who
the
often
gains
do
of the
have
rich
like
only really ever impact the poor, the lives of the poor.
exactly, right? Whereas like in the 19th century, if you were a farmer, which most people were, like you could potentially get away with it, right?
Well, you
Obviously,
just
like
kind
you
of
couldn't get away from
shrugged
like
because yeah, the tax man would come around, but like the tax man knows that if he takes too much, he's not going to make it out of town alive.
obviously that's not to say that like farmers were unaffected by these things. There were obviously things, but it wasn't as widespread as what would later come.
Well,
into
you were
20th
just
century.
it didn't matter too much because it was the goings on of the big city.
Exactly. Yes. But yeah, anyway, so
And so this is
I
going to
guess-
lead into Canada a really big way because as I was saying before, like one of the big problems was people weren't buying things, right? They weren't buying created goods. And that's a huge, huge problem for Canada because that is basically the only kind of economy we have is the trading of resources and raw goods to be turned into these higher luxury things.
especially at
So-
the time.
Especially at that time. Like we don't have a job economy the same way America does in the fact of like they have entertainment industries that kept going. Like Hollywood lived on while the Great Depression was going on.
But it still happened. Yep.
Yeah, we don't have like the same levels of we don't have like we have one economy and that is the resource one. That's why we like eventually got rid of Harper because Harper like screwed us over with our oil exportations and tied our economy too much to that. And there was that's why we didn't get hit so much with the Great Recession because we don't have so many people and so there wasn't so many mortgages. Like there wasn't
so we
so many
didn't deregularize as much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like that's literally that's it. So yeah, I'm not an economist. I'm not somebody who studied economy, but I know these very basic things. And so this is why the Great Depression hit so specifically hard because in the Great Depression it was almost the reverse. People, if you owned land, that was actually made you much safer than the people who didn't own land. And then it was the people
At least you could survive.
Yeah, it was the people who owned only things that really lost out in the Great Depression. Meanwhile, the Great Recession was the inverse. If you owned things, you were okay. It was the land, the mortgages, the housing. And we're seeing a version of this even in Canada today with the housing crisis because people don't actually own their houses. They are renting their houses, and renting is the crisis now.
Technically owning it, but it takes them like 30 years now to pay it back. So it's whatever.
And so again, then that's again totally separate issue problem that came about. And so this is where we are when the Great Depression hits. Yeah, Canada has nobody to sell its shit to. And in the old days, that wasn't a problem. Yeah. Like in the 19th, because you could just keep your shit and turn it into something on your own. Because you weren't making crazy luxury goods. You were making, I don't know, socks, bread.
Selling to your village.
Yeah. No, literally.
Yeah.
Canada was no longer selling to its village. It was selling to the great big city next door called the U.S.
Exactly. Kind of interesting, and we'll get into this, is that even the farmers that you're talking about that like could have gotten along, I guess, with just they could have technically survived just by cultivating their own things. It doesn't really work as much anymore because already by the 1930s, we had like single crop farming that was already emerging. So you can't just survive on wheat. And you had dust bowls arriving at the same time because we were starting to screw over the environment. So why not throw in a drought while everyone's...
Yeah, which is, not getting better.
No. So there's like a bunch of causes. We're going to break this down a little bit, but I guess thanks for this like insane introduction to the Depression.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to explain the fucking Great Depression and how that started. Like, we haven't even discussed the defaulting of the loans in Europe and the fact that like the whole concept of reparation payments kind of killing everything.
So let's dial it back, I guess. Let's dial it back before we get too crazy off of this, as if
it's too late
no one's already stopped listening. Let's try to make sense of this made-up science that is the economy. So, as you were saying, right, just fresh off the Great War, not only did everyone just borrow a bunch of money immediately after the Great War,
Yeah.
right, which we'll come back to, but also something that's kind of important to keep in mind is that people were being displaced left, right, and center. Like,
Yes.
people literally no longer had homes, right, in the aftermath, and not just in one place, literally across the world, or mostly in Europe, but still most across many parts of the world. So you had to like suddenly accommodate large swaths of people that were just thriving from everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so this is really important for Canada because we, accepted a lot of immigrants in the 1920s and 30s, which, usually is not a problem at all, right? And it was actually great for a big part of the 1920s because, as you said, it allowed the economy to grow.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, when you say they couldn't default on their loans, what do you mean by that? Like, what happens when you do that?
When you default on a loan,
Yes.
well,
Sorry.
usually, the banks will try and recoup the cost. So they will seize your things. They will repossess your shit. So in the case of the mortgage, this often means they take your house. The bank will take your house because it has the most value. And so if you have a loan on, say, what do you set the loan on? A motorcycle. Like, you take out some money to buy a motorcycle. You can't pay for it. Bank takes the motorcycle. They sell it. They recoup the loss.
Mhm.
Obviously, they may not make back all of their money, but they'll make back some of it. And so what happens in the world of business is the bank will possess your business, and they will sell whatever assets you have.
Really, one of them, obviously, we're not going to go into like a book length study of this, but what happened in a lot of places were like all of these businesses were trying to establish themselves and we were trying to recoup the economy. And what a lot of people realized as this was happening is that it was kind of House of Cards, right?
Yeah.
People were propping up things
that and it's also it's this misunderstanding of like you own anything really. You don't actually, especially your own money that you have in your bank. It's like, it's my money. It's like, no. It's the bank's money. They're just giving you access to this money because they get to do whatever the fuck they want with your money. They can invest it in however they please. That's how the bank makes money. They take your money, they reinvest it into things, and they make it safe, or they go under safe investments. So what was happening in the Great Depression, or before the Great Depression, and which got changed in the 30s by Roosevelt, was Wall Street brokers were able to, who were in like all these bank people, were making bets not only with their money, but with the money of the common people. And they could bet both sides of the field. And that put everybody else's money at risk. And that's how the Great Depression started, because they lost everybody's shit. And then eventually, thankfully, strangely enough, people did learn the lesson, and they put a rule into place saying you can't bet with other people's money. That rule was then repealed in the 2000s, which, Great Recession, but whatever. It's called like the Glass-Steagall Act, I think it is.
Something like that.
Yeah. Anyway.
So basically,
you own
go
nothing.
ahead, sorry.
You own nothing. And that's the other thing that's the big thing you have to understand about the economy. Nobody actually owns anything. It's all just what we tell ourselves.
It's all a lie. The economy's fake. Welcome to the world.
Realistically speaking, it is fake. It only derives meaning from the meaning we give it. Like, we
it's
can
not
turn
to say
around,
like it's unimportant, but it is.
It's incredibly important. It's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But the fact that like the most important thing in our existence is fabricated kind of tells you a lot about why the state of the world is the way it is.
This discussion for another time.
Yes. Sorry. So in the Great Depression,
you're right. Just to kind of get onto that a little bit, where not only because they're playing both sides of the fields, right? When people try to actually remove some of their money from the banks and there's no money left, right? Not only do the people not have anything, but the banks suddenly don't have anything, and the states don't have anything, right? Because they're all tied together now.
Yeah. So it was the separation of commercial and investment banking. That's what it was.
Okay.
Glass-Steagall, separation of commercial investment. Sorry.
Okay. No, but sorry. So what happens is like basically the whole system collapses, right? Like once you try to play both sides of the field and it blows up in your face, everything collapses. But what was particularly interesting, at least in the case of the Great Depression of the 30s, and how it relates to Canada, is that both its major economic partners were some of the hardest hit in the world, right? Great Britain just got out of the First World War, and it was certainly not able to resume its role of stabilizing a, by definition, unstable world economy.
Yeah.
And the US was like, oh, we're the center of all of this. We're the ones who started all of this shenanigans. Our bankers are jumping out windows, like you were saying. We're not going to be able to do anything. So Canada's left on its own being like, well, who's going to buy our stuff?
Oh no. What am I going to do with me toques and me hockey sticks, eh? Oh,
Somehow
buddy. Oh, sure there, buddy. I was going to sell you all my collection of toques.
There's the accent. There you go. I don't know what that first accent was.
Oh no.
To finish in that one. That was great.
What about me Timmy Hortons?
There you go. So unfortunately there were no Timmy Hortons to be had anywhere in the land. So
the darkest of times.
As a result, because both of our major partners were just kind of collapsing in on themselves, Canada was also among the hardest hit countries, right? So the United States and Great Britain basically both put in protectionist measures, right? Where they were not importing a lot and they weren't exporting a lot, right? They were keeping all of their stuff for themselves. And so everyone was doing that, which again is not necessarily a great idea. No, you can't survive that one. Nobody can. Right? It is an inherently untenable situation.
Especially when you've already become a globalized economy.
Yes, exactly. Right. At best, it works for a small anarcho-primitivist commune.
Yes.
The best kind. Right. But you're right. So, prices of wheat, fish, lumber, and all of these resources fell
especially fish.
Just as much, right? Yeah, exactly. They fell just as much as any kind of imported manufactured goods. So nobody was making any money off of anything. And so everything yeah, exactly. So, let's go back to, trading dried fish instead of using money, I guess. That worked out well for Newfoundland for a bit. Yeah, so we're all just kind of screwed.
Yeah.
And so just to put it in a bit of numbers, right, before we get back in, in the actual between 1929 and 1933, the gross national product of Canada fell by almost 30%, which is huge, right? The industrial activity of 1933 was was 57% of what it was in 1925 at the peak of the boom of the 1920s, right? National income in 1933 was barely over half of what it had been in 1929, right? Like it was just, imagine everything good and basically cut it in half. And that's what we were left with in the 1930s, right? So, there were slight moments where it picked up, but then in 1937 it slumped again, and it's really only the Second World War that would allow us to pick back up again.
Well, because that's the other part of the problem is that an economy requires faith. It requires confidence.
Yeah.
Again, you have to keep spending money to sort of fix an economy. And so when you see, because at that time, Germany absolutely destroyed in the economy, but it was the only place that appeared, I use this loosely, to pick itself back up in the 30s, because we didn't quite know at the time, but Mr. Hitler, while he was definitely he was fixing the economy in the short term, oh boy,
there was a lot of problems there.
Yeah. And the thing is, his economy was not capitalist based. It was very different. Well, it wasn't capitalist in the same way that American capitalism is.
It was a different kind, but it was still capitalism. Yeah.
Right. But again, that takes faith away in the current system. This is it was more far right, which I think it got far right enough that it became beyond capitalism and fascism, And the other thing we saw at the time was the rise of communism. And again, communism as a system, it's not capitalism, and so it stands directly in opposition. And so again, that takes away confidence and faith in the capitalist market. And so if there's no confidence, the market can't run.
Especially that at the time, those countries, right, in the East were actually doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Comparatively.
comparatively, they were doing well.
So there's a reason why people were turning more towards them and being like, hey, wait now, there might be something here. And then they did poorly as well for various reasons. But
And so the faith, like, if there's no faith in the system can never correct. The markets can't correct themselves on their own if there's no faith.
Exactly.
You would need either a large external event, and you would need direct intervention. Like, you would need direct market intervention, which, America got both of.
So that's kind of the thing, right? So because very quickly, obviously, banks are not investing anything. So companies are bankrupt left, right, and center, right? Nobody's making any money. But it's at this time that the famous economist, right, Keynesian economics kind of rises up, right? And it's exactly kind of what you're describing. Is this guy that comes along and says hey, at the very least, just put, even if we all agree that money is just kind of a random mass concept at the end of the day, right? If you give people some money for work, even if it's menial tasks, right, they'll have faith in that money and it'll generate right, the economy back up again, right?
Well, again, you have
which
to remember,
again, in the short term, it kind of works, but you can't do that forever. But,
businesses didn't have any money, but by default, the government has money. They'll go into deficit for sure. They'll go into deficit, don't get me wrong, but they they have, again, they could, at the end of the, technically, as much as you can control a fabricated concept, they control the money. Federal chair reserves, etc., treasurers, and so they can, that's when they started to step in. And shockingly, a bit of government and intervention helped everybody out. And they started their big projects and soup kitchens, and a new deal was struck, some would say.
Yeah, but we're jumping around a lot in this episode, but these soup kitchens and all of this came surprisingly late.
Yeah. 100%.
It took a long time for people to actually do it. It took protests, and it took people actually starving and dying, right? And people actually setting these up on their own for the government to actually intervene in any kind of meaningful way, right? Because it took much longer than people would like to think that it took for the government to intervene in something that explicitly ties to them. I don't think the government should intervene in every single aspect, but in this case, you kind of had to.
Yeah, we must make it clear.
Yeah.
While me and Patrick more than me are self-described socialists, we don't believe in full government control over the economy. But this is one of those situations where, in this emergency situation, the government needs to kind of fucking step in.
Your people are literally dying, right? Yeah. It was estimated that even at the time when, by 1933, quarter of Canadian workers were unemployed, and everyone else was basically on short time or extremely cut wages. Your population and your government as a whole cannot survive on such a system, right? And we have to remember, again, there was no unemployment insurance at this time, right? That would only come into existence in 1941. So even it's after the Depression actually hits that any kind of insurance would be put into place. So you don't have those mechanisms. The only people that are making money from the government at this time are people with pensions, right? And pensions in 1930 were not the same as pensions today, right? Which, are not enormous, but they are much better than what they were at the time, right?
Social Security is a lie.
Exactly, right? Well, at least at this time, especially. So you've got all kinds of economic issues. And so it's estimated that by 1938, there were about 1.1 million relief recipients that were still being served. Millions of people just in Canada were in need of dire help because it just wasn't working out, right? So this type of intervention that you're talking about literally saved millions of lives, right? And again, it was only firmly put into place afterwards, right? Most of what was put into place during the Depression were just Band-Aids on an open wound. So, I guess you can say that's a good thing. It is, but could have done better faster. And part of what when just to come back to a cultural aspect for a sec here before we get into some different aspects. Did you see the link I put in the notes of the Bennett buggy?
Yes. The
So this
buggy
is
drawn by two horses.
yeah.
Was that a
So this is
car
kind of
converted into a buggy?
so this is what's great, right? Is because well, it's not great, but it does
It's
like in
funny.
a single image show just what people were having to deal with. Where they had for a long time these brand spanking new material goods like a car, right? I don't know what model car this was in the picture, like let's say a Ford T or something like that. Who
Hmm.
cares, right? Like a brand new car. And then suddenly, like 2 years later, you have to have it drawn by a horse and carriage again because no one has any gas or no one has any money to buy gas for this car.
Yo, I'm waiting for that to happen now. I can't wait to see that
Yeah,
start happening again.
I look invest in horses. That's,
I'm just saying, horses are a solid investment. They use their transport, their sustenance,
yeah,
a good source of glue. I'm just saying.
culture. Yeah, it's no honestly, but
Just got to read the
this
facts on your own, people. Do your
this
research.
image or this thing, at least in Canada, really became like the central image that people associate with the depression, right? It's like
Yeah.
lost horizons in a sense, where what could have been was this brand new car that took us into the future. What we actually got was that same
Flying
car being
cars.
pulled by hungry horse. Like it is a haunting image in many ways, but
Oh yeah,
yeah.
but it's also a very funny image in many ways.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's funny also, I think, because of the name, right? Like people just gave no craps and called it Bennett Buggy because they just hated RB Bennett so much that they blamed him for everything. Oh God. So yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. But obviously, like the economy is not the only thing that is affected in the depression, right? What else might be affected, Mac, when people are hungry and poor and everything sucks?
See, you have to remember, once upon a time, Canada was a French colony. And so, in our roots, we are French, and the French do one thing very well. Unfortunately, we didn't have any guillotines in Canada. I don't
It's
know what you're
considered a
gonna
bit
make
it was considered a bit gauche in Canada.
it didn't quite fit the aesthetic. We had the materials to make guillotines, we just didn't.
We chose not. I'm sure someone thought of it somewhere.
I mean, that's a processed good, and we don't do processed goods in Canada, just raw materials.
Look, not gonna lie, I'm sure some farmer in Saskatchewan was like, you know what?
No, some
I
farmer
could
in
do something.
Quebec. Some
I
farmer
could
in
do
Quebec.
I could do something real good with this shovel right here. I'm tapping
God.
into my roots.
I'm tapping into my roots, and I'm tapping into the roots of my landowner.
Aside from people wanting to guillotine their leaders, what else do people want to do when
Well,
they're
it's a
or
major
what else
it's a
is
major
impacted?
change of politics, and it's going to be a major
Yes.
change of like there's again like you said protectionism, and that doesn't just come financially. That comes very much
Mhm.
like personal, social level protectionism of Canadians and the Canadian what is perceived to be the Canadian people, and that usually means ostracizing and kicking out certain groups of minority people. And this is money related, and as it often comes back to when things aren't money related for some reason, people decide that the best people to be angry at are Jewish people, which is, so great. We love it.
Classic. You know, it's really, the peak thing to do
Hmm.
whenever there's a problem. But yeah, we've talked about it on the show before. But yeah, in this case, right, we were receiving, especially in the second half of the Great Depression, we were really receiving a lot of Jewish immigrants, right, who were coming from Nazi Germany, right?
Hmm.
And so, that's obviously good in some ways that we're accommodating these refugees, which, by the way, we weren't open to at first, but eventually we decided that it was a good idea to have some over. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, there were two reasons why a lot of them were deported. One, because, like you say, it's easy. I would say three reasons. It's easy. Jewish people have been targeted for a long time, right? And in some parts of the world are still, right, for their Jewishness, right? But also because they were associated in part with radical views, right? We've talked about this on the show before
Hmm.
when we were talking about early Jewish communities. A lot of them, right, had these ideas for social change, right, that a lot of people in positions of authority did not necessarily want to encourage, so to speak.
Right.
And finally, because along with other immigrants, right, who had come here just on the eve of the Depression, and who obviously, like any immigrant, would find it difficult to accommodate to a new life in a new country, right? If you're suddenly faced with a depression, you're going to inevitably or most likely be one of the people who requires economic help, right? Because you don't have a settled foot yet. And so it was even easier to justify sending these people back, right? Or deporting them out of the country if they're so-called indigents. So yeah, not great. Jewish people are just one example, but all kinds of Eastern European immigrants were
Like I bring
also
up Jewish
deported.
people because like it's the 1930s. Obviously, very
Yes.
specifically, they are going to be talked
Yes.
about more than other groups.
For sure. But just like I'm adding other groups as
100%,
well because
100%.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's not going great for immigration, right?
It's not going great for current political parties. As we saw, when these things happen, people don't necessarily, I'm not going to call people stupid, but people necessarily, they look for easy solutions, and they look for things that are quick, and they want somebody to, they have a lot of anger, and they want something immediate and direct to put that anger towards. And so the other thing is current political establishments will often be upended, changed, reshuffled, reorganized. A large part of America was so upset with a black man being president that they elected an orange one. People have this perception that because we are both terribly horrified of change, but also yearning for it constantly.
That's the thing. So you're right in saying that a lot of people turn towards different political parties. One that we're going to be talking about in our next episode is the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. Not because it's like necessarily the most important out of all the small parties that would be formed in this time of political instability, but because of what it would later become, right? It was the forerunner of the NDP. So that sees the light of day at this time. We have things like the Social Credit Party, which is basically what the Conservative Party is now, an unacknowledged far-right party. So that's social credit. We even had a party called the Reconstruction Party of Canada, which was very similar. It modeled a lot of its programs off of the New Deal that you were mentioning, right? So a lot of these newfangled ideas were being launched around and coalescing around parties, some of which would stay for a long time. The Reconstruction Party wouldn't stay for very long. It would mostly stay only during the Depression. But things like social credit and the cooperative, the CCF, would continue on for many, many years. Right? And obviously the CCF is continuing.
Well, just certain laws, the Glass-Steagall Act, all that sort of stuff was in place for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I do, in some ways, like you're saying, there is like a back and forth movement that happens with politics. But I do always find it interesting how it's in these moments of crisis that people are willing to just try something new because they have to, right? Because it's all that's giving them hope in these very, very dark times. It's like, no, if we don't try something new, we might end up just recreating the same shit all over again, right? Which very likely would have happened. Right? I don't know. And you are, I don't know if we're not quite seeing the same level of stuff today, right? We don't really see, at least like on a wide, you do see like certain constituencies having like small parties and stuff like that, but like it's not the same.
I mean, more like we don't see the same extreme change that we saw before. And like even in the 20s and the 30s, we see change in political parties. But again, we were making jokes. Nobody actually got guillotined after the Great Depression that they did in France.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah, we decidedly became more.
Hold on, I'm just going to turn on
I guess.
Private mode to actually look this up, because I feel like I'm going to end up on some sort of watch list if I look this up.
I mean, putting yourself on private mode isn't going to stop that, but sure, go ahead. But it's more this idea that like every time we have these again, let me put it this way. Individually, we want to change. As individuals, we want to change. We want to be different, but we don't want society as a whole to change. The problem becomes, though, if every individual is changing and completing that change that they want, society will, in doing so, change with it. Now, what we see these days is that people will often have these struggles of they want change, and therefore they will want a new, like, the Republican Party of today is not the same Republican Party of even 20 years ago. There was a massive upheaval and change. And you know what? Come the results of November, we might see another massive change in what the Republican Party becomes afterwards. And these things will cause more change continually.
We'll see.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to say like we're going to have societal upheaval, but these moments of dysphoria will necessitate some kind of new, like, that's why most politicians lose elections at the end of the day, is because they are seen as old and not generating the change.
Exactly.
Trudeau won because Harper was seen as being too stuck in old ways, and now Trudeau's going to lose because Trudeau is seen as being stuck and not doing anything. And then you know what? Like 5-10 years, we'll probably say the same thing about Pierre Poilievre.
Just to bring it back to the Depression here, where the Social Credit Party promised a lot of these changes, right? It was basically like a right-wing populist government, and it was elected in certain provinces like Alberta. And that's the thing, is that very quickly they were taken out of office by 1935 because people did not actually see any real change happen, right? So you see exactly the dynamics that you're talking about playing out, because the most vocal opposition, right, at least in Alberta, to the problems didn't actually manage to do anything. That would not be quite true with other parties. Like the CCF would actually be quite successful in places like Saskatchewan, but again, after the Depression, right? Once there is a certain amount of stability that was put into place, then the CCF and /NDP was able to kind of put in some changes that are still with us to this day, right? But yeah, I think that point that you're making is well taken, right? Yeah. So the other thing that I want to mention before we get into the actual like
play,
obviously, like things like birth rates are also things that were falling at this time.
Yes.
Just because people not only don't want to generally have children in terrible times, but even if they did, they can't afford to. Right? Babies were expensive at the time as well. So,
and you're right before, like, and sort of the war will come, and as you said, menial labor and direct government intervention will fix the economy, and nothing requires more menial labor and direct government intervention than war.
Say what you will about it, it serves that purpose very well. Yeah. And that's why, like, most countries that are in like dire straits will often declare war on someone just to kind of boost their economy.
Sorry, we need to find WMDs.
Yep. Anyway, I don't know. Do you have anything you want to add on the Depression as a whole before we get into a bit of the play?
No, I think this is about it.
Okay. And Lost Years. Do you ever heard of this play?
No.
So it was written in 1974 originally, or it was originally put on in 1974 by a playwright called Jack Winter. And it was based off of a series of an oral history series that was collected by Barry Broadfoot, who basically interviewed people who had gone through the Depression. Right. And again, the publication of that book was timely because, as you were saying, there was a lot of economic instability in the early 70s with the oil crisis and all that. So there are perhaps some parallels that Winter was channeling in wanting to produce this play at the time that he was. Right. But generally speaking, right, it was based off of people's real life experiences. But it's not a play in the conventional sense of a play. It is basically a series of vignettes. Right. There, it is separated up into different scenes with a couple of distinct characters. You have things like a hobo or the quiet man. There's a crazy woman. There's a balladeer that kind of like a chorus, if you will. There's a politician. There's all kinds of stuff. So there's basically these series of scenes wherein people talk about what they're living through in a particular moment that's supposed to give a snapshot of life during the Great Depression. And yeah, I don't know. I have a few scenes that I picked out that I thought were just kind of fun. But do you have any like opening thoughts about what you've read of the play or anything that you wanted to highlight as far as this play is concerned? Just to get us started.
I mean, you know me, I always love a good play. And I do love the idea of a play told through vignette. I think it provides a deeper. It can provide they make for interesting things of study, but usually not the most interesting things to actually read in your own free time.
Exactly. I think this is probably one of those plays that looked really cool when you saw it on stage. Right. Yes. But I think there's still some like fun stuff going on in the play. And we can get to it. But why do you think he would have separated it up as a series of vignettes rather than have it as like a cohesive story? Because there really isn't one. It's non-linear. It's basically personal anecdotes that were adapted into dialogue, right? So why do that for this kind of subject matter rather than make it a story?
Because that is what the Great Depression was. It wasn't one large story. It was a series of small stories that affected everybody. And if you want to get across, like we were having trouble just at the start of this episode describing the Great Depression.
It was deliberate. We wanted to
totally
mirror what was.
If you want to describe the totality of the impact of this thing, you need to do so through a large number of stories. So
right, and like the fact that he manages to narrow it down to what's basically like 6 stories or 6 characters, more or less. I forget how many characters exactly there are in the play, but 7 characters. Sorry, 7 or 8 characters. But right, and you still get that sense of it being, them dealing with something a lot larger than themselves, right? Which leads to a bunch of really interesting scenes, which we can get back to. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It mirrors like this disjointed and chaotic reality of the Depression, right? Where lives are interrupted and start up again and uprooted and forced into unpredictable situations. So yeah, I think that's a very good point. I don't know if you wanted to add on to it. I think I cut you off there, but anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you're getting on. Yeah, I think that sort of hits on the. Yeah. How does the play open, Patrick?
With a Bennett buggy.
Yeah. What's a Bennett? Explain. Give it to me. Read the little opening monologue.
I'm not going to actually sing it out because I'm a terrible singer, but there's a balladeer, right? Like we said, which is basically the chorus for this whole play, where he comes on and literally opens with Act 1. You asked me what a Bennett buggy was. Well, in the 1920s, farmers bought automobiles, Chevs, Fords, Humpmobiles. I don't know what a Humpmobile is. Kinds they don't make anymore. Then came the crash and the drought, and nobody had any money for gasoline, let alone repairs. And they'd already thrown away all their fine old horse buggies every farm used to have. So what was left? And then there's a little stage direction. The rest of the company enter as a Bennett buggy complete with horses. The balladeer answers, a horse or two pulling a car that wouldn't run. And then they have a little song.
Oh, love that.
It is. I don't know about you. When I read this, I kind of felt like, but because there's a character called Hobo in this, like those hobos, right? The hobo riding the rails type of song. That's the vibe I was getting from these sing-song moments that appear throughout the play. It's just a bunch of people riding along the rails, singing songs to pass the time because that's all that there is to do in this moment. There's no work. There's no entertainment to be had, so they just kind of sing songs about how life sucks and why the Bennett buggy is funny. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention as well about like the play's structure, apparently, and this is I got this from Winter's introduction to the play, where he's like it was an interesting way of having people mimic, or having the play mimic how people remember events. Right? Because we don't remember things in a very linear way. We often remember pieces of events or important moments or traumatic moments, whatever it may be, but we don't remember in any kind of cohesive way. And we often reconstruct memories, right, rather than actually remember them. And so the nonlinearity was kind of a way for him to show how this is mostly just people talking to themselves and spitballing based off what they remember, right? Which I think is very interesting in a way of harkening back to the oral history that this comes from. Right? But yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, no,
Um,
for 100%.
yeah. Um, okay.
I like the idea of them actually building a Bennett buggy and bringing it out on
Yes.
stage.
But yeah, like, can you imagine just having two horses on a Bennett old ass car? Like, I feel like that would be a lot of work to go through, but it would be totally worth it. You just have a horse there the entire time for a whole scene. But yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up, right? There were kind of four main points that I brought up. One was the play's relation to faith. One was the loss of pride and dignity that the play brought up. The criticism of government and or injustice that it brings up, and the kind of ironic hope that it demonstrates, especially at the very end. I don't know. Was there any one of these themes that you wanted to hit on in particular at first?
Oh, between faith, pride, hope, government.
Yes.
Let's talk about faith. You gotta have faith.
Thank you. So there were two.
Hobo.
Yeah, exactly. That's the character's name. I'm sorry. So there was where was it? Yeah, there was a quote by the balladeer. That it's on the same page actually in my version. So where the balladeer is referring to a specific moment, right, of faith, and I think the way that the hobo responds is very interesting, right? And it says a lot. So this is the end of the hobo's of the balladeer's kind of speech or soliloquy kind of song. It's only 1932. If the last 3 years have made you sad, there's 7 more coming twice as bad. But he swears he prays a lot, but God won't listen to his rot. The people haven't got a chance, and I hope you like this depressed dance. So he finishes his song like that, to which the hobo responds, I'll tell you what the Great Depression was like. It was the survival of the fittest. I read my Bible more now than I ever did, and I never read of hard times like that. I don't know. Before I say anything, do you have any thoughts about just this type of moment, like what it says about people's relation to faith in these times and why they would want to bring that up in the play?
You want a solution, right? It's like we said before, and faith can be a solution. You want strength. Faith can be a source of strength.
Yeah.
It's easy to see in these times. Maybe we don't see religion so much, but we do see sort of cults of personalities cropping up around. When people are in perceived places of weakness, they look for someone to lead them, someone to sort of take over them. So I think that's what's going on right now.
It's kind of interesting also when the balladeer says, like, Bennett swears he prays a lot, but God won't listen to his rot. But where there's a moralizing aspect to it as well, I feel, where he from the position of someone who's, more of the common person, very much criticizing the, rich and powerful for their moral failings, right? God won't listen to them. They're the people who are at fault, right? Both morally and politically. Whereas at least, whatever are our problems, we at least can claim some kind of moral high ground in this situation, which I think is like an interesting point of division that I think a lot of people don't necessarily remember from the Depression. It's something that came up a lot, right? Christian groups were often tied to political groups at this moment. And that was something that you heard a lot, was like, oh, this other group is being completely immoral, right? And that's one of the reasons why they're... yeah, and I just like the hobo's response. I read my Bible more now than I ever did, and I never heard of hard times like that. Right? Where you're right, like you want hope, but it's hard to find hope.
Yeah.
When even like your book, your guiding book doesn't offer anything close to what you're living.
No, nothing concrete.
No, exactly. Right. Or even if it does offer concrete situations, like it's so far removed from what you're living that like, what am I going to do with this? Right. Yeah. I don't know. Anything else you wanted to add about Faith. Yeah. Or morality.
God.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no,
Tell
it's
me
fine.
about faith or I'll kill you.
Tell me about morality. I was fucking dead. I mean, I also think there's something to be said for people's last desperate hope to cling to, because morals go out the window when you're cold and hungry. And so I think there's something to be said here about how desperately people will try and cling to faith and to morals to show that they are not that desperate, not yet.
Yeah.
How they weren't they're going to try and keep to something they do understand. And so I think faith is part of that. Faith is that last ditch of strength.
I think that's really good. Yeah, because that is mostly why people hang on to some semblance of faith, even in the contemporary world. I think even like if we tend to criticize, right, like Christian conservatives these days, like our friends in the U.S. or even in out west,
or if we tend to criticize the institution of it.
Exactly, right. Like there is a reason why people still fall back upon it, and like fundamentally,
there's a
it is
beauty to faith.
Yes, exactly. Right.
There's something beautiful to it.
Yeah. Do you want to read the next passage that I selected out? This is on page 200.
Sure.
I don't know if you have it open.
Sure, buddy. I gotcha.
Cool. It's the little soliloquy by the quiet woman on the middle of 200.
It was just part-time?
Yeah. You don't have to read all of it, but yeah, until you feel like it's good.
All right. It was just part-time, as much of it as I could stand. Canadians had their pride. My God, how they had their pride. Men would say that never in the history of their family, never had they to go on relief. These men, a few of them, told me they had to walk around the block a dozen or more times before they got the nerve to come in and apply for relief. It was as though they were signing away their manhood, their right to be a husband and to sit at the head of the table. It was a very emotional time, the first time, when a man came in and went up to the counter in that awful yellow and green office. Where's for them to be served by a woman? So mostly I turned over the new ones to the other clerk, who was a man. Do you want me to keep going? Oh, I didn't hear anything you just said. You cut out for a second for me.
I said, if you want, but you can read the entire play if you want to, but you don't have to.
No, I never read the entire thing. Are you kidding? Look at me. What do I look like? Goddamn nerd?
Yes, really. That's why you're my friend.
Yay.
But yeah. I go ahead.
No, I think there is something. I think it very much speaks again to one of the, not the problems, but one of the realities of capitalism. And again, that confidence we were saying in the economy, it also requires a lot of pride and confidence in yourself. And so I think that is, because that's essentially what it is, this idea that you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can't do it all on your own. You can do it all without help and support, which again is just as much a fabrication as the system itself. Nobody exists in a vacuum. Nobody lives without, there's no such thing as a self-made man. A man at all times is made from a woman. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, there's just other people around them.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, like literally made in a woman.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This passage does point to that in many ways, right? Not only the pride, right, of someone who is no longer able to fulfill his male duty as provider for the household, but quite literally that the only salvation that he can get or relief that he can get is by returning to woman. Mm-hmm. Right? It is really like a striking passage in many ways. And of course, it helps that it's also said by the woman of the play, or one of the only women in the play, who is penetratingly insightful about the state of masculinity in the 1930s. So, but I really like this passage, right? And I really like that. It was as though they were signing away their manhood, their right to be a husband, right? Which ties, not only like economic strength to manhood, right? But specifically, right, your right to be the head of the family. Right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you were smiling. Did I say something funny?
No. Yeah, sort of. Well, no, don't worry about it.
Okay. My existence is just one big show to you.
Yes, come on. Yes, we're talking about capitalism. It's all just one big show.
Yes. It's all smoke and mirrors, baby.
Let's go. Society exists on a knife's edge, baby.
Not more than ever. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add. I know we've already been talking for like an hour and 10 minutes at this point, so I just wanted to kind of like highlight some points, but I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add about that.
About this hope and this pride?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's pride and faith are almost similar in that way, because again, you're clinging to something, some kind of moral calling. Your pride as the provider, your pride as the helper, the supporter, the this, the that, that is what we cling to when we have nothing else. When we have nothing else, then the pride is all we got. And so it's easy to look at these people and disparage them for their inability to give up their pride, for their inability to like stand up and help and take help. But can we really all say the same, that we would do the same, that our pride hasn't like impeded our decision making at times?
Especially when it comes to work, right?
Yeah.
And job relations. Like, I'm not going to take that job. I'm well educated. I don't need to take this, right? I'm sure I can find something better or whatever, right?
I don't need advice on this paper, this project.
Mhm.
I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing now.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't need to ask for help from my boss even, because whatever. It shows that I'm
I
not
like that
independent.
it's very specifically like the man with the job, because again, there's modern context for that too. The whole alpha male red pill movement didn't come from nowhere. It comes from this perceived fabrication of pride that men have.
Which I think on some level, not the men's rights movement. I feel like that's a very bizarre and inappropriate movement, but like this need to feel wanted and feel useful in society is, I think, like a primordial one that I think that movement that you're referring to is tapping into. But they're tapping into it in an unhealthy and destructive way, right? Which is what makes it dangerous. But I think you're right, right? It does connect in very similar ways to this play, right? And this need to feel wanted and feel useful, right? And it does kind of connect to one of the other passages that I wanted to bring up. This one's on page 242, if you wanted to turn to that one, because it's like a dialogue that's happening between.
Let's go.
Between
dialogue in a play. Wild.
Yeah, this is all dialogue. There is almost no stage direction. But it's basically a conversation that's happening between a young man, salesman, quiet man, farmer, and hobo. So all the men in the play, right?
Let's go, hobo.
My boy hobo.
My boy hobo back at it again, tearing down the bourgeoisie.
But they're basically having a discussion about what we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks, which is not necessarily, but yeah, which is the resistance and the movements that a lot of people went on against the government in order to receive better relief or actual living standards, right? To actually do something more productive for the average person, which they felt was not being had, right? So we're going to be talking about this, like I said, in a next episode, but I think this exchange on 242 goes to show just how much people felt failed, right? By people who were supposedly there to protect them democratically, right? I don't know. Do you want to read the quiet man part on 242 and I'll read the farmer part?
Sure.
Nice versa,
so I'm guessing, I'm sorry, the policeman?
Yeah.
I'm sorry the policeman was killed and some of our boys were arrested, and it made a lot of noise across the country, but it was a snow job. All R.B. Bennett wanted a showdown, and he got it. Guns were firing. Guess who had the guns? Guess who got killed in his police buddy's crossfire? Bennett wanted to stop the trek and discredit the trekkers, and he did. Oh yes, he succeeded. We were just a bunch of Reds carrying the card who had to be stopped from invading Ottawa. It wasn't like that at all. We were ordinary Canadians wanting to put our case. But Bennett slapped his label on us, and it stuck. He did a lot of harm that day. That guy.
Here, when the occasion came up, along with dozens of boys from the Trek, I joined the Mackenzie Papineau battalion that went to help the Spanish Republic. Why not? Bennett already had taught us all we needed to know about fascism.
And then there's a long monologue from the hobo.
Right, where he basically condenses both what the quiet man and the farmer just said.
Yeah, this is quite interesting indeed.
So
again, it's manipulation, and it's what people look towards and want in these events. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of distrust, and a lot of what people want, and that will then get manipulated, redirected, and turned against. People will be finding any excuse to attack each other.
when they're talking about the trek, they're talking about a real event that happened, by the way, which was called the Trek onto Ottawa, which we'll talk about. But it was basically a long march from Vancouver to Ottawa, right, across the West. And as is implied in this piece of dialogue, it ended in bloodshed. A lot of people died.
Yeah.
And so, and what I find really interesting is the reference of Bennett here to a fascist, right? Which I don't think is quite fair to Bennett in this case. I wouldn't necessarily call him a fascist, but it does show, just like you're saying, how willing people were to be angry, right? Figurehead like him, right? And saying, well, if we're going to fight someone, we should fight not only the fascism in Europe, right? That's what the Spanish Civil War was about, but also fascism at home, right? Or what we perceive as fascism. Right? People who were actively going against our democratic rights, right? And yeah, I really like this as a piece of dialogue, not only because of what it represents from what you said, but also I think it's just a good piece of writing from Winter's part. I think he is a genuinely good writer, and this very much represents it, where not only are people criticizing the inequalities and insecurity that they're going through, but they're also ironically participating in what they're accusing Bennett of doing by slapping a label on him and presenting him in a straw man kind of way. Ultimately, I think kind of correctly. I don't think Bennett handled a lot of situations correctly, but nevertheless, he wasn't a fascist.
No, fascist is a word we toss around a lot these days.
Yes, but yeah, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add about this one in particular, but it does kind of open up to what we're going to be talking about next episode.
The laborers, the unions, the workers.
Hell yeah.
Heck yeah.
My boys. My boys, the hobos. Walking.
Let's go, hobo. Right. I think that's good for me.
Okay. But the last, I just wanted to finish
section?
off just like the last little part. It's a couple of pages after, just literally the last piece of the play. I'll read it, and then we'll call it a day. Just because it ends on the whole play is very depressing, but it is ironic in many ways, right? In its hope. Or the strong woman in the play says, "My son Raoul came out of school in 1934 when he was 18, and that spring he sat on the veranda where we had a big swing, and I'd hear that swing going creak, creak, creak until it used to drive me mad. Raoul did that for 5 years until he was a man of 23, and all the time there was no work. I don't think he ever had a girl. I don't think he did. He was as handsome as Jean Béliveau, and he did nothing. He was a vegetable. That's what his sister called him, and it broke my heart. The 9th of September 1939, he joined the army, the Canadian Army. He was killed at Dieppe the summer of 1942. He was a wonderful soldier, a very good soldier, you see. Somebody wanted him. There was something for him to do." And that's how the play ends. Mm-hmm. Which, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I get the ironic hope. There was something to do. Fight in a war. But I get, it really does start to make clear the way the World War II was sold to everybody. A war of good versus evil, because again, people needed faith, they needed confidence, and they needed something they could take pride in. It was just, it's a requirement.
Exactly. And it ties back to everything that we talked about with the play, right? The pride, faith, and all of that. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. And yeah, it does end ostensibly on a note of sadness, right? She's obviously distraught that her son died at Dieppe, who wouldn't be? But at least his life was worth something after 10 years that were lost. Which, say what you will, is a beautiful sentiment. Unfortunate as it may be, it's beautiful that a mother was able to at least find something for her son in those last days. Yeah. I don't know. Any final thoughts?
No, I think that's just about. I like the themes. Again, this is a good piece for study. I don't know if I'd ever use this for leisure reading.
It's for school, it was a good play.
It makes for great syllabus work.
Yeah. Peace out, my boy hobo.
Yeah. Peace out, hobos. Walk quietly into that sweet night, sweet prince.
Join our Patreon. Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Leave a 5-star review.
We have a hobo on our Patreon.
It's only hobos on our Patreon. If you're not a hobo, we don't accept you. All right. But yeah, you know the drill. Leave a 5-star review, all that good stuff. It's almost 9 p.m. here. I'm getting tired.
It's almost 11. I'm getting hungry.
Okay. Peace out. That's not my catchphrase. What was it? Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. We lost your identity.
Oh no.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.